where he is and maybe where he's going. But Bradley, first of all, welcome to Colorado. Thanks for coming down to Colorado Springs. It's not only, as I just learned a few minutes ago, not only your first time in Colorado Springs, it's your first time in Colorado to play at all.
Absolutely. First trip. Today's day one.
What's your first impression?
I found out when I got off the plane, it's hard for me to breathe.
Yes.
I was like, walking through the airport and just trying to breathe. And I said, man, I was asking David, my motion guy, I said, man, am I supposed to really feel weird right now? And he said, nah, you get used to it, man. So.
Well, we are just so pleased to have you here. And of course, a lot of folks here have already heard your song on the radio, Mr. Bartender. Why don't we start there? Where'd that idea come from?
Actually, I was hanging sheetrock with my dad. Covered in sheetrock, mud, and dust, and he made a comment to me a couple of months before that, son, someday I'm going to be too old to be doing this, and I'm going to give this business to you. Well, I always appreciated him taking care of me, but I told him, I said, Dad, I appreciate you, but I don't want that job. Matter of fact, I don't want any of your tools at all. And I said, so maybe someday I can write some songs and maybe get me a record deal and get a song on the radio. And so anyway, I was covered in sheetrock, mud, and dust in 2005, and come home and saw my guitar sitting in the corner. Walked over to it, picked it up, and I wanted to write something that had a feeling like George Jones and Keith Whitley and Merle Haggard, Buck Owens, all those guys. I fell in love with a sad song and a teardrop at a young age, and it carried over. And I sit down and strummed the guitar that day, and I said, Mr. Bartender. And I was able to write that song quickly. I never even wrote it out on paper. And my dad, while he walked outside to put up his sheetrock toes, he came back in and I played it for him. And he said, Bradley, did Merle Haggard or George Jones do that song? And I couldn't convince him that I wrote this song. And 3 years later, I hadn't been married long as 2008. I was covered in sheetrock, mud, and dust again. Of course, I'd had a bath, a lot of them. I was covered in sheetrock, mud, and dust, and my wife, she was cooking supper when I got home, and she said, Bradley, I heard a commercial on the radio that John Rich from Big and Rich is doing a talent search in downtown Nashville. And she said, I think you should send some of your songs that you've written to him. And if he likes you, he might invite you to town.
Now, you all know who John Rich is.
Hell yeah.
Well, you've seen him on Celebrity Apprentice, and he's also half of Big and Rich, but you might not know that he's a very big producer.
Absolutely.
In Nashville. In addition to all of those things, he's very successful. So you hook up with John Rich, and you're going places.
Well, it's really been crazy. My wife, she told me about the talent search he was having, and then she told me about this thing called MySpace. Well, I was 28 years old. I didn't have a computer, and I didn't even know what MySpace was. And so she loaded some songs up for me, Bartender, Mr. Bartender being the first one. 3 weeks after that song was loaded on MySpace, Charlie Panaccio, who is a partner with John Rich's publishing company, heard the song and sent John Rich the link. And they got in touch with me and invited me to Nashville. And that was in 2008. And I've been working with those guys ever since. And we just signed a record deal last February.
Well, congratulations.
Yeah.
Now, I heard you mention that some of your influence are George Jones, and Johnny Cash, and Merle Haggard. What does it mean to you to be on the same record label as George Jones and Johnny Cash and Merle Haggard?
It don't seem right, but I'll take it. I don't fit in. Those guys, they've done a lot of great things. I'll never scratch the surface of what those guys do at all.
Now, you're a new traditionalist, so your sound is a little more traditional than a lot of things that are on the radio right now. How does it feel to carry that banner?
Well, going to Nashville when I was younger, I was trying to meet people. I would go to publishing companies, go to record companies, and never got in the door where they would let me play for them. They would always tell me to leave. But I knew I was different, and I knew my songs didn't fit the format. And everybody, I've had a lot of people tell me, Bradley, you sing too country. Well, I'm from Duck Springs, Alabama, which is, there's a couple hundred people. There's nothing too country for me. So I never could understand that. And I'm just glad that, a record label, and John Rich, being a producer, believed in me enough to let me be me.
Now, you recently played on the Grand Ole Opry.
Yes, I did.
What's it like to perform on that stage?
I couldn't put into words what that feels like. I mean, I watched that as a kid growing up. Always wanted to play on that stage, and the night I was fortunate enough to be there, some of my heroes that I grew up listening to were there that night, and invited me to come out and play a Opry's Country Classics. They do all these. It's a Thursday night. They invite you to come play 2 of your favorite songs that you grew up listening to. And I got to be on the show with Gene Watson and Eddie Raven and Lynn Anderson. And, you know, to walk out there, me being a nobody, you know, just getting started, it was really a humbling experience to do that.
Well, we think you're going to be a somebody. We are sure glad that you came to Colorado Springs and you're going to play. Would you do a couple more songs?
Absolutely. I'm going to play 2 more songs.
All right. Bradley Gaskin, Columbia.
Yeah.